Good day, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar, What's Wrong with Your Candidate Experience and How to Fix It. We've got an exciting program lined up for us today. Before we dive in, I wanted to give everybody a quick overview of the webinar console. Over on the right-hand side, you will see a Q&A dialog box where you can ask questions throughout today's program. We would love to keep it as interactive as possible, so if anything comes up, please feel free to drop your questions in there, and we'll get to them as soon as we can. And over on the left-hand side of the screen, you will see our speaker profiles today. So with that, we can go ahead and jump in. Today, we are joined by Amy Miller, Senior Technical Recruiter at Amazon, Sean Echeverria, Senior Product Manager at Walmart, and Blaine Shields, Director of Customer Success here at HackerRank. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us today. We'd love to hear a little bit about your role and your experience.
Hi,
so we just go in alphabetical order.
Hi, this is Blaine with HackerRank. Pleasure to meet everyone. I've been with HackerRank for about 6 years. Customer success team is very focused on identifying recruiting workflows, helping with best practices, and ensuring our customers identify recruiting efficiency within the process. So I'm excited to be here today and look forward to the discussion.
Hi, I'm Amy Miller. I'm Amy Miller. I've been a big tech recruiter for the last several years. I've worked for a couple of big corporations, and just have been recruiting engineers for a long time and have a lot of thoughts on candidate experience and just how important it is to these folks. So excited to be here with y'all. Thanks for inviting me.
Hi, everyone. It's Sean. Hey everyone, it's John. I've been at Walmart now for about 4 years through the Jet.com acquisition. Our team essentially grew out of Jet.com as a team that kind of partnered with all HR teams, so recruiting, HR VPs, and the likes to infuse technology into each part of the associate journey so that it's easier for our employees and candidates and alumni when they leave.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, it looks like we might have a little problem with our audio. For some reason, it's coming through a little bit broken. So if somebody could use the Q&A dialog box, please let me know if you're having issues with the audio. Okay. All right. It sounds like people are saying that the voices are coming in a little bit clearer now, so we should be.
Amy and Sean. Amy and Sean, can you give it one more try on your end?
How does this sound? Any better?
Sean?
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
It's saying it's coming from here. So, all right, ladies and gentlemen, we'll go ahead and dive into the program. So we'll let Sean and Amy kick us off by answering a couple of questions here, and then I'm going to dial back in to see if we can get a cleaner audio connection. So, Sean, Amy, as we get started, we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about the candidate experience, we'd love to hear from you about what the candidate experience looks like at your companies. We'll let you guys go ahead and kick off the conversation, and then we'll be right back on.
Sounds good. What do you think, Sean?
I found that, and I guess I can just give my overview of all my thoughts, but I found that data capturing within the HR vertical has been very hard. I don't come from an HR background at all. Like I said, I'm a PM that helps build out the technologies within the HR world, but data capturing has always been hard. And when it comes to candidate experience, that still holds true. So I found that teams find it hard to figure out, how do I capture data? How do I, get candidates to respond to my surveys if they're sending them out, and improve upon it, right? Like, well, how many people do I need in order to say that's my baseline? This is what we're going to, measure against.
Right. I think that's a great point because you have data points and then you have trends, and they're not always the same. So you could have one very frustrated job seeker or previous candidate who's very angry, had a very bad experience, whatever it was, for whatever reason. And that may just be a single data point. That may not necessarily mean that your program's broken or that everything's wrong. But when you start seeing the same things kind of popping, and so to your point about being able to gather enough information and enough of those stories, it's kind of hard to pinpoint what really are we getting right or wrong, because frankly, we don't normally hear from people unless they're upset. We don't necessarily hear the happy stories all the time. So I think that's a great call out. My initial thought was, ooh, engagement's really hard because there's just so much noise. But now that you're kind of bringing that to light, Sean, I'm kind of feeling maybe the data gathering and slicing and dicing it, knowing how to take action on it probably is the harder part.
Yeah, well, if you couple the two and, you include engagement as part of the data that you're trying to collect, that, again, like it all starts with like where okay, we'll go all three, right? Where do I even start? Like, how do I know if they're being engaged? What am I collecting from an open rate when recruiters send out emails, or how quickly they're flowing through the pipeline? These are all data points that we should be capturing to get to an overall candidate experience index, we'll call it. But yeah, that's kind of where I lean towards.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. It's definitely, there's a lot of rabbit holes you could fall down with this. And do we slice it by engineers? Do we slice it by leadership? Do we slice it by, there's a lot of different ways to kind of play around with this. I think it's important, but then I think on the other side, there's a caution around don't get too deep in the weeds of the data and spend so much time there that you're kind of losing the heart and soul of recruiting, which is just engaging and delivering.
So what have you seen in the past as ways of capturing or benchmarking candidate experience?
Yeah. So I've worked in companies previously, and I'm only a few days into my new company, so I can't speak to what we do now because I have no idea. But in previous companies, we've definitely done surveys. So post-closure surveys, right? Whether you got an offer or didn't, if you were interviewed, you got a survey. And we also did net promoter scores. So that's always interesting. And your data can be super skewed, right? I had one, it was very early in the quarter. This is some time ago, but very early in the quarter, there were only 2 responses. One person was really mad at me. So I all of a sudden had like this 50% negative, which was terrifying. But then when you actually look at it and realize like, okay, one person's really mad, one person's really happy. It's still not quite enough to say Amy sucks half the time. But so those are kind of the big things, the candidate surveys, and then just, your likelihood of recommending this company, this recruiter, you would apply again, those kinds of things.
Yeah, I agree. I think so. Interestingly enough, we found the same to be true early on in the Jet days, right? So you send an email to the candidate and you say, I hope you had a great experience. If you have time, fill out the survey. And you kind of can lose them because they've already left. There's no real incentive for them to really follow up. Unless,
that's a great point. Yeah.
So what we did actually was we actually created iPad experiences for the candidates. So when they got in, there would be like a history of Jet and like everything we've accomplished so far on the iPad as like a simple icon that they can touch. And then we would give them the iPad at the end of it to take the survey. And obviously, when in the moment, they're able to give better feedback because it's right there. It just happened. And so we found that one of the more valuable things that we used to do.
That's a great call out.
Scalable-wise, it was tough because when you talk about getting an iPad for every team across Walmart, you're obviously going to talk about a bigger budget. But I think for teams that are a little bit more scrappy, doing something that's similar would be, pretty effective.
Yeah, and that's a great call out. I think, how are we kind of incentivizing candidates to provide this data? Because what's ultimately in it for them? That's the same old station we're all tuned into. What's in it for me? And so if somebody had a really outrageously positive experience, they may just be feeling really good and want to compliment the recruiter or the team, and that's great. Obviously, if somebody had a terrible experience, there's a different kind of emotional currency there where they want to, kind of make it clear how they feel. But, for the kind of average job seeker who had a relatively run-of-the-mill experience, if that exists, it's tough. How do you really kind of encourage the feedback that we're hoping to get? Because it's really for our benefit, right? I mean, downstream, there's a benefit for future job seekers, or if you're somebody who's coming back for another, attempt or something, we want to learn and do better, but it's tough. So I think you kind of almost have to capture it in the moment, right, Sean? Wouldn't you say? And I think that's kind of what you're getting at. It's like, here, in this moment, here's an iPad. go give us some info.
All right. Hey,
yeah,
Sean,
I definitely have seen that helping us. Hey,
hi, Laura.
Welcome back.
So you just turn us loose. We'll be fine.
Yeah, it sounds great now. For some reason, when we had our last speaker join, our audio broke on this side, so my apologies to the audience.
No worries.
Okay, so we're going to be getting us a little bit back on track here. We did have a quick audience poll, just so that we could help tailor our conversation to what the audience is experiencing. So everybody in the audience, you should see a pop-up come up within the webinar console. We'd love to hear from you about what the hardest part of building your candidate experience has been. So we've got three big buckets here: engaging with candidates, benchmarking candidate experiences, and even just determining where to start. So Amy and Sean, you guys were already talking about benchmarking a little bit, but audience members, if you could let us know, we'd love to hear from you about where you are struggling with candidate experience. We'll give everybody just a quick second to answer the question. All right, let's take a look and see what people said. All right, so it looks like we were starting right in the best area, benchmarking the candidate experience. So you guys were both talking about how you start with how you approach benchmarking metrics. Do you both track candidate acceptance rates? Excuse me. Do you both track candidate acceptance rates, and then how do you improve that over time?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, a lot of times, and I've certainly been in a lot of positions where that was my goal. So just my job as a recruiter, like, you need to make X number of hires. So, and so that's kind of the big overarching goal. We have to understand how many people are accepting. But I think there's other categories that we also need to be tracking. So it's kind of benchmarking at every part of the funnel. How many people am I losing after, the initial phone screen? How many am I losing because our interview process is too long or too convoluted? So I think tracking the acceptance rate is obviously kind of the big picture, but there's so many other little things that feed into that. And so I would just encourage everyone listening, like, think about kind of sanity checking at every level. Wouldn't you say, Sean? Like, how would you, from a PM perspective, how would you look at that? And am I thinking of it the right way?
Yeah, no, for sure. I think, so Walmart definitely tracks. I mean, like, the amount of data coming in is very robust, and you can slice it up, like you said earlier, Amy, from like engineers to designers, and see how each one, relates to the other. But I think if you focus in on key areas that are an issue versus trying to tackle the whole, whole candidate experience, you'll be in a much better spot, because I find that a lot of people want to tackle everything and improve every single touch point, when in reality, you can do a lot by just seeing where your efforts actually have the biggest impact, right? So one thing that you brought up, Amy, is like specifically, the question that gets asked most often through normal ATSs is like, well, what's the reason that you're not accepting the offer, right? And if it's specifically for the on-site experience, then focus on the on-site experience and don't do anything else for a quarter, and see how you've made a difference. Trying to fix everything all at the same time is just going to lead to failure more often than not.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, not to go off on too much of a tangent, but I'm always skeptical when a recruiter talks about how they never have offer declines. Like, if you're not having people tell you no, how are you learning anything? How are you figuring out where we need to make improvements, whether it's our compensation, whether it's our process, whether it's our, kind of engagement start to finish. So I think there's just so much to learn kind of at each point. And I know we're going to go deeper into kind of the experience overall, but if you're not really paying attention to kind of every step of the funnel, you're really missing out on an opportunity to improve it for everyone.
I would agree with both of what you guys are saying. From a HackRank perspective, we work with customers from all different industries, all different sizes. They'll have different brands as well. So companies with really strong brands experience different difficulties with companies that aren't as well known. So I think, Sean, what you were alluding to is you have to figure out what are the specific pain points that are greatly impacting you, and then how can you possibly solve that, right? What's the one thing that you can do to make an impact? So that's something we see. We see customers, for example, implementing HackRank at different stages in the interview cycle because they experience different difficulties in different ways. So can definitely relate. We hear all different kinds of pain points from different customers across different segments and industries for sure.
All right. So when we look at improving the candidate experience, a lot of people are concerned that as you begin to add candidate experience into the overall consideration set for the hiring process, that it will add several steps to the hire time. How do you guys feel about that? Shu, Paul?
I'm feeling this is false. I'm curious what steps they think we're adding. I'm looking at this more like, if I'm starting from engagement, am I sending the right messaging to the right people at the right time? Am I being very thoughtful in my outreach? Am I being very personalized? Now, if we're talking about that's adding an extra step, like I, as a sourcer or as a recruiter, have to go do a little homework before I start spamming people, then yeah, add the step. I mean, the candidate experience really starts from that first touch point. So my initial kind of gut reaction is that this is a myth, but I would kind of caveat that with, look, if we are adding a step or two, or there's some other work that needs to happen to improve this, it's absolutely necessary work, and you better get on board with adding these steps. So.
Yeah, I think people want to see the end result before they do something, right? So when I've spoken with recruiters in the past, it's like, Sean, you're going to make me add 3 more clicks to add this attachment for this beautiful infographic that we want to send all candidates, right? And they amplify those 3 clicks to, thousands of candidates. And so obviously it makes sense that they don't want to do that, but to Amy's point, if you're able to show the end result and the impact in terms of, increasing that, again, like I alluded to, like a candidate experience index score for yourself, then it's going to be worth it. You're leading to more conversions, and overall better experience on the right candidates coming into the company.
Yeah, I was just literally a candidate myself weeks ago, and I got to tell you, I took a ton of notes. I had a positive experience. I'm obviously here at the new company, so it turned out good. But I definitely was kind of checking myself, going, "Oh, did I do that, or should I do that, or is that good, or is that bad?" So yeah, I think. I don't know. I know we're on to the next factor myth, but that's an important one. Just get on board. It needs to be done.
Yeah, well, Amy, that's a great transition. Candidate experience is becoming a big topic of conversation. Obviously, we've got a lot of people here interested in learning more about it. And this takes us to our next hot take, fact or myth. In the information age, companies are at greater risk than ever to hurt their brand if they have a bad candidate experience. Any thoughts on this one?
I have so many thoughts, so I'm going to let Sean go first.
What's the saying around a bad customer engagement? So they end up telling 10 friends, right? When they have a bad experience, they tell 10 friends, and I think the same is true with candidate experience. You have one person who has a terrible experience, they're going to tell other people, and so obviously your brand's at risk, and something needs to be done to make sure that you don't waste time making everyone happy, but you do find ways to create that Whether or not you want to take culpability for it, that's fine. But like here, we hear you, and we're going to continue to iterate off of our candidate experience. And I think that more often than not, just having that feedback loop open is needed when you have so many people coming through your front door.
For sure. I totally agree. And I think about just my own career in recruiting. I've been recruiting since the 90s. We were handing out paper applications. But the biggest difference, so in my early agency days, I could, inadvertently give someone a terrible experience. And the worst that could happen is they tell a few friends. If I give somebody a bad experience today in 2020, working for some very large brands over the last several years, I get copied on tweets that also include my CEO. I mean, it's terrifying. So yes, it is definitely a fact. I think the world has become smaller in many ways just because of our connections with LinkedIn and Twitter and Facebook and all the social media. And yeah, if you have a bad experience, you're very, very quick to go and post that somewhere that could easily go viral. And that's so different than even 15 years ago or 10 years ago when we were still, a little more siloed.
Yeah, exactly. So again, that takes us back to that benchmarking conversation a little bit. Once you get your initial benchmarks, like time to hire, are you tracking the additional metrics like candidate acceptance rate, or if you're using technical skills assessments, how many people are taking the assessments, things of that nature?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it starts from the very first engagement, like how many people are actually responding to my messages. If I'm reaching out to 20 people, I really should be getting 15 to 18 responses, even if there are no responses. I should be getting some level of engagement. If I'm not even getting an initial response, something's wrong with my messaging. I haven't earned a response, even if it's a not right now response. So it starts there. I think to your point, and specifically thinking about HackerRank, we should be paying attention to how many people are dropping out. If we're making that, which I think is an important part of the process. I mean, assessments need to happen on some level. And if people are opting out, that's again, another thing we need to look for. Are we involving assessments too soon in the process before they're really sold on the opportunity? Are we just putting too many assessments in the way? Are we spacing them appropriately depending on, moving on to each next stage? So I think all of those things are really important, and we have to, time to hires come up a couple times, and I get it. It is important to some degree, but I think that's the last thing we should be worried about. I think there's some other kind of earlier stage stuff that we really should be focusing on, and make sure that we're dropping in the right messaging, the right assessments, and the right cadence at the right time throughout the whole experience.
Yeah, and on the assessment side, I would completely agree. One of the things that we really closely track in our test health dashboard is participation rate. So are you essentially getting are you getting candidates who actually respond? Are you positioning that assessment at the right point in time? And something you guys talked about a little bit earlier is candidate feedback. We actually ask for candidate feedback immediately after they've taken that assessment. Similar to what Sean talked about, we're going to give you the iPad and allow you to provide your feedback. No better point in time than to get that feedback right away. Hours go by, a day goes by, the odds that they're going to leave feedback significantly goes down. So completely agree that you have to try and find the right point in time to insert the technical assessment. It could depend on seniority level. It could depend on, is it a referral or an inbound application? There's a lot of different factors that you have to consider depending on the role, high volume, low volume, and then also making sure you're getting that feedback in real time. So all of the things we actually closely track in what we call a test health dashboard, so we can provide that real-time feedback, because it is super important.
Yeah, agreed.
So, Amy, you touched on this a little bit earlier when we were discussing the information age and then damaged brand with candidate experience. So, so one of the biggest channels that candidates use to talk about their experience is Glassdoor. Do you incorporate Glassdoor reviews into your benchmarking?
Big heavy sigh. So I have not, and again, I'm speaking kind of from a historical, all the jobs I've worked at before, because I'm too new to speak to what we're doing at my current company. I'm going to say no, but I'm going to say that this is a myth, but I want to also add that it can't be ignored. And so going back, gosh, 10 years probably, a role that I was in, we were getting killed on Glassdoor. I worked for a very small company, and everybody hated us. Our CEO rating was like 23%. It was terrible. So now once I started and, kind of worked there for a couple of years, I was like, oh yeah, we've earned this. Okay, this isn't great. But here's the thing. The idea was we needed to pay attention to it. We needed to be aware of it. We needed to understand that there were simply going to be things that we couldn't impact from the recruiting perspective. But getting ahead of it and actually in those early phone conversations with prospects or with applicants is like, look, you're going to go do this research. You're going to see these things. Let's talk through it. I will be very, very available to you if you have questions or if you really want to understand. So I don't think it's the best way, but I think it is, again, one of the ingredients that we need to be including as we're looking at the entire kind of holistic experience and how to improve it.
Yeah, exactly. And so, again, within the candidate experience, we talked about from the very first interactions, but then once the offer's been accepted and the candidate joins the organization, the onboarding experience gets folded in. So is this something that should be tracked as part of the candidate experience?
Yeah, Sean, if you have any thoughts, I definitely, again, have a lot of thoughts, but I want to give you a chance to share as well.
Yeah, I know my audio has been choppy. Just doing a quick mic check before I rant on, and no one can hear me. Do I sound okay?
It is a little choppy. Maybe, Sean, for some reason, I saw that you've got some office issues with Wi-Fi today. Maybe if you could... We'll kick Blaine. I'll kick it over to you, and then maybe you can dial back in.
I can speak to what we do here at HackRank. We do take pride in our onboarding experience. We actually do something fairly unique, and I don't know how many companies do this. It probably depends on the size. Given we're relatively small, we actually have every leader from each department sit with all new hires, kind of give them a crash course on that department's goals, their incentives, OKRs. And it's led to a really strong candidate onboarding experience. So new hires come in and they have a really strong understanding of how the organization works as a whole, how we're all working together with one common mission. So that's something that we found very helpful, and we've gotten really strong feedback from our candidates. That's something that we do track internally.
Yeah, I would also add, I love that, first of all, and I would also add that onboarding starts from the time the offer is signed. A lot of recruiters make the mistake of thinking, got a signature, got a start date, I'm done. You are not done. You are absolutely not done. So once that button has been clicked, so to speak, now we're entering into this really weird emotional place as a candidate and as a prospective employee, and leaving my work family, leaving my boss who I might have, really loved. And even though I'm excited about this new opportunity and I'm ready for a change, there comes all this emotional stuff and noise and feelings that are coming up. And so if a company makes the mistake of not staying close, not staying connected, and not doing like what Blaine was referring to, having leaders reach out and sharing what to expect week one and those kinds of things, you can lose people, especially in this market with counter offers being so prevalent. So yeah, absolute fact. We should be paying attention to it. We should be tracking it. We should be thinking about what works and what doesn't. And then like Blaine was referring to, if we're getting really positive response to, hey, oh my gosh, the CEO reached out to me, that's great. Have the CEO reach out more and more.
That's actually something that I, as a hiring manager, I've been hearing more and more, I'd say, over the last couple of years. One of the more common questions in the interview process is, what does my first 30, 60, 90 days look like? Am I going to be getting training? How am I going to learn the platform, learn the product or the solution? So I think that's something I have heard more of. That's a trend that I've been hearing. I know we're going to talk about trends in a little bit, but that's something as a hiring manager I've been getting asked quite frequently. So yeah,
absolutely.
I've never heard anyone talk about, once the offer is signed, you're not done. And I completely agree. It makes a lot of sense.
Hey, can you guys hear me okay?
It's Sean. Maybe try one more time.
Is this any better? Because I do want to talk about this factor myth.
Unfortunately, it is still a little bit choppy.
Okay, no problem.
So I'll ping you the dial-in information. Yeah. Okay. While Sean's getting himself situated, we'll go ahead and jump into the next topic. So trends. So Amy, Blaine, what trends are you noticing in the hiring space? Maybe we can shift focus a little bit here, particularly around the technical hiring space.
Mm-hmm.
So go ahead, Amy.
No, go ahead. I have some thoughts, but I need a minute. Go for it.
Yeah, that's fine. So we work with customers every day, different industries, different segments. We've seen different trends in different segments, is from what I've experienced. Companies who are a little bit smaller, they do have the ability to be a little bit more agile. So they've been willing. I'd say the trend is they've been willing to try more things, especially as we have a new wave of the new term is Gen Zers that are coming out of university. There's different approaches that you have to take. So they're trying different things. With larger organizations, a lot of the processes can be a little bit more difficult to change. So I'd say the trend with some of the smaller companies and kind of middle-sized companies we've been working with, especially tech companies, tech-forward companies, they've been trying a lot of different strategies in terms of candidate engagement, whether that be doing something really cool at a career fair, or they're plugging in a HackRank assessment, or they're doing some sort of a panel interview on site. They're trying different things to see what sticks and what really resonates with candidates. Because candidate experience is probably the most important thing that we hear from recruiters. With enterprises, larger enterprises, it can be a little bit more difficult for change. But I'd say the trend that I've seen last year or so is smaller companies have really been seeing, they've been trying different methodologies.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think two big things come to mind for me, whether these are actual trends or just me rambling, we'll see. But two big things come to mind for me. I think one is getting distracted by the shiny. So a lot of people are like, oh, TikTok's the way to go. Everybody needs to be on TikTok. Go recruit on TikTok. Like, stop. Just because there's a new shiny social media tool doesn't mean that we should all run to it and try to, start leveraging it. I think really, and it kind of bleeds into the second thing I was thinking is there's not a one size fits all. Your audience, especially if you're a larger company and you're hiring all kinds of people, there's not a single way to recruit. There's not a single platform, a single type of assessment, a single interview structure. There do need to be some structure, and you obviously want to be mindful of treating all engineers the same or kind of assessing in the same way, those kinds of things. And that's where I think like a HackerRank comes in really helpful, because it's just everybody kind of gets to go through the same process, which I think there's some value there. But I hate it when recruiters kind of jump on the next shiny thing. Like, you're actually really annoying the audience, to be honest, by thinking that we all have to rush to this cool thing and all recruit this way. It's like, no, we don't want to hear that. Not everybody does.
Hey guys, I tried calling in again. Is this any better?
So much better.
Wonderful.
Awesome. Probably should have tried that earlier. Yeah, I actually completely agree with Amy. I think getting distracted by the shiny object is definitely going to, waste time. If anything, what I found is that content always is needed, and you need to find that balance of like evergreen content that you can always send candidates about, but then fresh content coming in from all different people, all different teams, right? So tech teams, design teams, et cetera. And that requires a lot of legwork that often I think is never done. And so one of the things that we've done internally here is build out toolkits that people can tap into, right? Because as Amy said, some recruiters are the experts for their space, right? If you have someone recruiting data scientists, they know what's going to really catch their eye and the right message to send them. But in order to create that brand consistency, they need something to tap into so that they're not sending them just, a Word document. So what we've done is built out toolkits to help recruiters kind of just fill in the blanks, grab and literally guide them into how to use the toolkit so that they're grabbing the latest article, they're grabbing a video or a quote from internal campaigns that they can then use to entice talent externally, which I've seen super effective, and that's where we spend a lot of our time on now.
Yeah, I just jump on. I think content is super important. Customization of that content, especially for companies that don't have as big of a brand. I know I've mentioned the word brand several times, but that is something that we see customers do quite frequently, is really go to extreme lengths to make sure their message is known. If they have a very cool mission, they're inserting their content at different points in the interview process, not just in, trying to get the initial application, but throughout the entire flow. So I would agree, content's king.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. So when we talk about content and engaging with audiences, we've got our next factor myth. So what are your thoughts on including the estimated salary in the job description? Does that help engage candidates?
Nobody wants to touch this one. No, I think, just super quickly, I think that I think I've seen some data that indicates it does help. So I would say probably, but I would say there's also some landmines there. So this is probably something I would recommend companies try out, maybe identify certain roles that might make sense. And as an example, if you're hiring for like entry level, maybe it's retail workers and okay, minimum wages in my state, I want to say it's $15 an hour. So if you're offering $17 an hour, that might be a great draw. That might be a great example of a place to put in an estimated salary or hourly range, because you're kind of showing off a little bit, like, hey, we pay more than the usual retail shop, come and see us. But I think the potential downside is if you're talking about a range, the reality is candidates are hearing the top number. If I'm telling you I can pay you between 100 and 120 and I come back to you with an offer at 115, you're going to be mad at me for the most part. So I think there's some risk there, and I think it can be helpful, but it's probably one of those things you want to kind of test a little bit. It's not going to be every single position in the company all at once, but maybe you kind of work it in slowly. What do you guys think?
Yeah, it's not. Oh, go ahead, Blaine.
No, go ahead, Sean. You guys have more experience on salary negotiations than I do. I'm separated from that process.
I was just going to say, I'm not an expert in this space at all when it comes to specifically putting out salaries, but I know that, to Amy's point, that frustration that's felt when something is advertised and then you come back with a different number that wasn't advertised,
absolutely,
that frustration is felt because they don't understand what just happened in the background. And so if anything, I think as long as you have clear communications around the process that's happening when you do deliver that offer, you should be okay. I found that certain teams have started to use certain words like compensation philosophy or things that help guide the candidate to better understand what's going on in the background when they're looking at them as a potential fill for the role.
Yeah, I agree. I would say this one is probably a myth, because I think there are going to be circumstances where it makes sense. But I think it's one of those things you just do with caution, because, as Sean rightly pointed out, it can very quickly look like a false promise. The posting said this, I interviewed, it came back with that. There's a lot of stuff happening behind the scenes that could just change that. And we don't want to frustrate people unnecessarily.
Yeah. And Amy, that's a great transition to our next factor myth. So if you lose candidates toward the end of the process, it's likely due to miscommunications on salary. Love to get your thoughts on this one.
Oh my, where to begin? I think I'm probably the one that has the most experience actually putting out offers and talking about salary, sadly. So, I don't. This one feels a little bit more like a myth to me. I think that, I definitely have worked in environments and been in situations where we didn't talk money soon enough. And so I guess you could call that a miscommunication because there was just no communication, right? So I think money is one of those things you got to talk about it early, often, and specifically. Losing candidates toward the end of the process is likely due to a lot more than just salary. I'd hate to put it all on that because typically declined offers, which I do get, there's usually a lot of moving parts. It's usually they've got 3 or 4 competing offers, so somebody's got to lose. It's going to be more based on job content, role satisfaction, team fit. It's rarely about the money. Money typically, especially larger corporations, we can make it work. We can be competitive. You know, we all kind of know what the other one's doing. So yeah, miscommunication, yes. Miscommunication on salary, I'm not so sure.
Yeah, I would say this is, I don't know, I feel like most platforms now, or most ATSs now are asking this, right? Or it should be. If you don't have an ATS that has this built in, then you yourself should be asking what it is. So it's less of a likely do and more like you should pinpoint why people are not accepting at the very end, and then focus on how to fix it. Again, I completely agree with Amy. Like there's a lot of moving pieces. My wife just was in a similar situation where a bunch of competing offers, and she literally, the salary piece was the last thing on her mind because what tends to happen is a lot of companies end up matching offers, right? And so they'll match it. They might add a little sprinkle on top, but it's never enough to really say, okay, I'm going to go join X company because of, especially more senior positions, for like an extra $5K. It's usually something more deeper than that. The belief in the leadership team, the mission of the company, and these are all things that should be, more upfront communicated and to entice them to come through the front door to begin with.
Yeah, and not to belabor this, I mean, this could be a whole nother session, to be honest, but I know I personally have never taken a job purely because of salary or salary being the number one focus. I don't believe I've ever really closed a candidate solely based on money. I've actually closed candidates with lower offers than competing scenarios because we just couldn't match for whatever reason. And they still chose us because we really put a lot of emphasis on what they get to do, who they get to do it with, where they get to do it. There's so much more than money at work here. So it's important, especially if you're a lower paying and you're running into those situations where you can't compete. That's where declines in the information you're learning comes into play. But yeah, I think salary is not nearly as important as we try to pretend it is.
Okay, well, great, thank you. So now we've got a little bit of insight into what trends to pay attention to and how people are approaching salaries and job descriptions. Let's shift the conversation a little bit towards technologies. So technology is almost an underpinning of the candidate experience today. We have the ATS platforms, assessment platforms, and I'm interested to hear from you, what role does assessments, automation, and AI play in your candidate experience?
What do you think, Sean?
Well, I know for us, it's a lot of what we do, my team particularly, is testing, right? Testing to see how easy things integrate, how seamless can we make the actual candidate experience, because the more you fold in assessments and other tools, the more clicks you're making them go through when something should be, when they're expecting a seamless interaction, right? And so I know we've used HackerRank. I'm pretty sure we still are using them to some extent or on some teams. And we've used other ones before as well. And it's all about, like, how seamless can I make it? How, is it a link once they go on there? Are you vetting how easy it is to use? Can you get internal employees to help vet certain technologies? So we do a lot of the vetting ourselves on our team. And so, just making sure that you personally know what the candidate has to go through. So if they do experience any issues, you can help troubleshoot. You know what to do about it.
Yeah, a couple of big ideas for me on this is ease of use, and relevance. So as a candidate, as a consumer, if you will, of this process, I want it to be easy. I want it to be a low lift. I can apply online with my LinkedIn profile, whatever that might be. That's great. And then moving into the assessment piece, is it relevant? Are you going to learn something about me and my background that's important and that basically proves my fit for the job? Is it a personality assessment? I'm probably going to, I don't like that, but is it a technically relevant exercise or test? Great. I want to prove to you that I'm really, really good at whatever this skill is. So yeah, those two things, I think, just like Sean's talking about, make it easy for me to use, make it easy for me to navigate, and make it really, really relevant and help me understand the why.
I completely agree. And we can even look at it from another lens as well. We encourage our customers to create assessments or the content very specific to the role, so the candidate actually has a really good understanding. If I accept this role, this is the type of things I'll be doing on a daily basis. So finding ways to make the content relevant to the skill, but also relevant to the company. So if you're a fintech company, doing something around bank transactions, is that something they actually want to do every day, right? So. Yeah. Making the content, like you said, specific to their skill, but then again to the role, to the day-to-day. We found it also leads to much more productive conversations at later stages in the interview cycle, because especially looking at technical hiring, engineers are doing whiteboarding sessions, they're doing code pair sessions, they're interacting with the candidate's code and making sure they have that skill. So the more you can more easily relate to the day-to-day or the stack that you're using, which languages, which frameworks, it makes the conversations much more productive later on in the process as well.
Yeah, totally agree.
Okay, so I'm paying attention to time here. I want to make sure that we do give audience members time to ask their questions. So we'll transition into one more fact or myth and then move into Q&A. So fact or myth. Candidate experience can become less personalized with technology.
Fact, if we let it. Yeah, that's the key. There is a person behind the technology. There is a recruiter, coordinator, hire manager, somebody who's running it. If we let it, absolutely, it's our job to make sure that doesn't happen.
Yeah, and what I've seen more and more is that the need for someone to be, I'll call it like a recruiting content operations person is more evident than ever because of how many different roles we are hiring for and the complexity of each role itself, right? So as technology continues to expand, you're now bringing in people who are coming in purely for machine learning or purely for artificial intelligence, and you need to be able to talk their language and make it personalized. Otherwise, you're going to lose out on them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you. All right, audience members, before we move into Q&A, we do have a quick poll for you. And we were wondering if you would like to see a demo of either HackerRank or Workful. Again, you'll see a quick pop-up. And again, this is very quick. Just let us know if you're interested in learning more about either organization or both, and we'll be able to get back to you. All right, and with that, we can go ahead and move into Q&A. Audience members, so please use the Q&A dialog box to ask any questions you might have about today's program. We do have some questions that have come in over the last little bit. So the first one, jumping back to benchmarking, this one is in regards to a career page. So do you use your career page to benchmark how you are converting visitors to candidates into the pipeline?
Yeah, I've definitely worked places where they're tracking things like that, like tracking number of visits, then number of, I guess, clicks, what action people are taking. So yes, I think also previous companies, we've tracked the source. How did someone get to our career page? Did they, click on like an advertisement or those kinds of things? So the short answer, yes.
Yeah, we have tens of millions of people coming to the careers.walmart.com site. I think a lot of what we track is each individual vertical, right? So if you create a campaign specifically for e-commerce, are you seeing a lift on the e-commerce page? Are you seeing the sources that lead to people landing on that e-commerce page? And then going back to, who's owning that content? How are you refreshing it? Really empowering the recruiting teams to own that content is what we're striving for now, which, again, I think it's more new, right? We don't, recruiters are meant to recruit. And so you're starting to find this new role of someone having to help with the content piece so that, again, the recruiting team can focus on what they do best.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, so this one, Blaine, is actually for you. Does HackerRank have the data to support when a tech assessment is the most effective when placed into the process?
Oh, good question. So we do track specific metrics around the recruiting workflow overall. We sometimes think of it almost like a marketing funnel. We do track click rates on emails, open rates. Are they coming into the assessment? Are they completing the assessment? How much time has it taken? So that is something that we actually track very closely with our customers. We try and do at least a monthly call with them to go over, hey, this test is at risk. You're seeing poor candidate feedback. You're seeing low attempt rates. Those are all things that we work very closely with. We actually find that a lot of our the customers we work, or the points of contact we have are in recruiting operations. So someone like Sean, right, we're in charge of an entire program to make sure the entire process is operating efficiently. So those are all things that we track really closely.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, so this goes back to the age of information. So how do you respond to candidate experience feedback that you receive via Glassdoor or the Blind app?
I spend way too much time on Blind, I have to be honest. Oh my goodness. Yeah, I think I talked about this earlier where I had the one company several years ago that I just really tried to get ahead of it and kind of own it from the start. Look, you're going to see these things, you're going to read these things, and let's talk about it. But I think also I definitely have taken comments from Blind and gone back to my team and been like, hey, this is kind of popping as a trend. And again, data points versus trends, right? We're seeing this, a lot, or we're seeing kind of the same thing coming up, and what can we do? So, again, in my role, I'm just a recruiter. I'm one out of thousands probably. But I think just ringing the bell, and saying, hey, we're paying attention, we're listening, we want to keep our leadership informed and make this top of mind. So yeah, I do look at all of that, but again, I'm looking for trends. I'm looking for things that are coming up repeatedly over and over again with multiple people, not just one angry person.
Yeah, and then I'll just I'll add on that once you have talking points, very important, because you can come up with everything that you want the team to say, and especially in larger organizations, but a good number of people might not know about it, and so they're still not communicating in the same way that you would want them to. So we created an internal brand center where people can download these talking points, and we keep them updated so that people are all on the same page at all times. And so we're constantly monitoring what negative feedback we're getting, and then to Amy's point, just making sure that we're approaching the situation head on, so that misinformation isn't spreading.
And I, as a recruiter, appreciate that because, again, I have two sides. I am myself a recruiter who has thoughts and feelings and emotions, and I can talk to you personally, but I'm also a brand representative. So I appreciate when my employer takes this seriously and gives me specific things that are okay to say and is kind of owning and understanding what the messaging needs to be. So I actually love that, Sean.
And this is talking about recruiter and hiring manager collaboration. How do you partner together with your hiring team to ensure role clarity for candidates?
For me, it is we need to focus on and agree on what is the business problem that we're trying to solve and what is the talent we need to solve that problem. Recruiters are not order takers. I'm not going to show up at your office and write down that you want a cheeseburger with no lettuce and then go find you a cheeseburger with no lettuce. That's not how this works. It's figuring out what is the problem we're trying to solve, what does the person need to be able to do, learn, build, whatever, to do it. And then we're building a picture, if you will, of what the talent looks like. And then we go and find it. So it is very much a partnership. I try not to use the word support because we are in it together. It's a partnership.
And Sean, how about from your side?
No, I don't have, again, look, this is the area where I don't have personal knowledge around, just because I know that our teams do connect, but I'm not in the room taking down anything. But we have helped, again, as part of our toolkits, we've helped hiring managers better define themselves what they're looking for so that job descriptions are a little bit more accurate. And I think that's been helpful. It's a helpful tool that we've armed the recruiting team with, because that's the first step that they take. They send it over to the hiring manager, and they're having them fill it out to do a lot of the legwork, because you don't want everything to be so standardized that, you know, a role doesn't really make sense. There is unique aspects to each role, and so you want to make sure that those get defined ahead of time.
Yeah, I want to work with Sean. He gets me. Yeah, I need to be equipped with that kind of stuff to go in and have a reasonable conversation with the hiring team. So yes, definitely.
All right. And then on the tail end of the candidate experience, so the optimal outcome is extending offers, but there are candidates that'll be rejected. So to ensure a good candidate experience, what are the best practices in rejecting a candidate? Do you do it over phone, over email, and then how do you manage any negative feedback that may arise out of that rejection?
Yeah, I think this is, again, kind of an area that I'm probably most familiar with, so I'll just jump in and y'all please do weigh in. I think if we have ever spoken on the phone, I owe you the courtesy of a phone call. You know, I think there's a lot of, you can debate another time whether or not every single applicant who ever applied to any job ever should get a phone call. That's a discussion for another time. But if we have ever engaged live, you deserve a live rejection call. And so kind of best practice for me and how I do this is I set it up from the very first call. Like, we're going to go through this process together. There's a number of touch points where things could end. And this is what that's going to look like if we don't get to the next step. And so I'm very clear at each step, like, if we get here, this is what's going to happen. I'm also very clear from the very first conversation. If we get through the interview and I'm not able to make you an offer, please know that I cannot give you specific feedback. I'll do my best to give you high level feedback because I think that's important, but just know company policy, blah, blah, blah. So I think just being really transparent and trying to give as much insight into what to expect makes that final message really much easier to handle, because they kind of know this is a possibility and this is really what that conversation is going to look like if we have to have it.
I love that. I think that's what I would expect as a candidate myself. So I 100% agree with you, Amy. And I have to drop off, unfortunately, but thank you everyone who attended, and feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn if you want to continue the conversation. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Sean.
All right. And so actually we do have time for one more question, and Blaine, this one will be more relevant to you. In regards to assessments, how do you encourage candidates to participate in assessments, especially when looking at the difference between entry-level and senior-level candidates?
Ooh, good question. I think something we touched on earlier, the workflow has to make sense, right? So if it's entry-level or a university program, we find it's okay to bring that assessment earlier in the process, or even make it the first touch point. If it's a more senior-level candidate, oftentimes those are referrals as well. So you have to be a little bit more, you have to show them a little more love, if you will. So finding the right workflow that works for those types of candidates, or, you know, depending on volume as well. If it's high volume, that might warrant doing it earlier in the process, because maybe you're okay with a little more drop-off or some drop-off. If it's a very low volume position, data science, right, it's hard to fill. There's only so many candidates in the pool. You can't risk losing candidates from that pipeline. So perhaps you insert the assessment a little bit later on. And again, that assessment might be tailored towards their specific skills. Or maybe you don't do an assessment at all. Maybe you do more of a code pairing session, or a project-based question versus a coding question. So different strategies for different seniority levels, and different avenues in which that you found the candidate. So all things that we've kind of developed some best practices on. We'd be happy to share with you.
Okay, fantastic. All right, and audience members, we are coming to a close. We've reached our time limit for today. Thank you very much for joining the program. And Blaine, Amy, really appreciate your thoughts and insights. Thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, and audience members, as we sign off today, we do have a quick survey to get your feedback and thoughts on today's program. Again, I must apologize for the audio issues, and hopefully next time we'll be able to make sure that we've got a better connection going into the program. But otherwise, we hope you enjoyed today's talk and look forward to your feedback.